Local programming on KRWG made possible in part by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to Fronteras, a Changing America. I'm Edmundo Resendez. New Mexico has had a lot of firsts when it comes to space research and development, specifically the Tularosa Basin. It has been home to many space pioneers and developments that made space travel possible. The Museum of Space History contains exhibitions ranging from Robert Goddard's early rocket experiments near Roswell to a mock-up of the International Space Station. The Museum of Space History is located in Alamogordo, where there is lots to do, as we see here in a Living Here segment produced by KRWG-TV.
Well, it's the oldest zoo in the Southwest. It was established in the original town plat in 1898. Now, the zoo kind of developed over the years as a menagerie there. I found an old postcard of a bear on an island in a cage in 1908. Kind of progressed as a small town menagerie for many years. We have both exotic and native animals. We've got some good footage this morning of our mountain lions, and next to them are black bears, our coatis, fox, otters. Something we're very, very proud of here at the Alameda Park Zoo is that we're a nationally accredited zoo. It's a very friendly community. Beautiful weather. We call ourselves the friendliest place on earth.
In actuality, we started off as the International Space Hall of Fame in 1976. And then in the 1980s, the Hall of Fame kind of morphed into a museum and Hall of Fame, and that's really kind of how it came into existence. It was the Space Center at that point in time, and then at the turn of the century, its name changed over to the New Mexico Museum of Space History. And so we're really trying to tell the story of the space programs, not only here in the United States, but throughout the world. And we always, though, try to have a central part of that that's about New Mexico and New Mexico's contribution to the international space race, the international space programs, and the exploration of space in general. We've got exhibits inside the museum, outside the museum. We've got an IMAX theater, planetarium. We do renovations of exhibits and restorations of artifacts. The museum came into existence obviously back in 1976 through the efforts of people here in Otero County in the Tularosa Basin and in the city of Alamogordo. These were engineers, these were scientists, these were community leaders that really came together and said, this is the place to have an International Space Hall of Fame because of the contributions of folks from throughout the world. It's a great place to live. The museum location up here is absolutely fantastic with the view that, I know you're looking up at me right now, but as I'm looking back over you, I'm looking into the Tularosa Basin out at all the white sands and everything, so it's a great location, and the community is just fun to be in as well. For anybody who wants additional information about the museum, go to nmspacemuseum.org, and you can find out anything you want to about us and the International Space Hall of Fame.
Alamogordo is home to Holloman Air Force Base. Alamogordo certainly claims Holloman Air Force Base as part of our community. Whether or not you're a civilian or you're military, you're heavily affected by the military here in Alamogordo. Even if you've never served or you've never had a family member that serves because of Holloman Air Force Base, Alamogordo is a vibrant, active community. In the Air Force fight song, they talk about off they go into the wild blue yonder. I have to wonder if they wrote that song as they were flying on Holloman Air Force Base. There's no Air Force base that has the space, the airspace that Holloman Air Force Base does, and certainly this is a gem and a jewel to our nation. We love jet noise.
Welcome back to Fronteras and Changing America. I'm Edmundo Resendez. My special guest today is Christopher Orwoll. He is originally from California, and I have to say, welcome to Fronteras and Changing America, and I have to ask you, how does a former Navy man get into space?
Yeah, strangely enough, yeah, you would think maybe a pilot might. I was a submariner, so
yeah. On top of that, you were a submariner.
Kind of a tortured path. I was the commanding officer of the Naval ROTC unit at University of Kansas, teaching there and retiring. Planned a trip to a museum in Kansas, the Kansas Cosmosphere and Space Center. And they had an announcement on their website about that the president and CEO had resigned, and talked to my wife, we prayed a little bit, and submitted my resume, I almost have to say almost on a lark, and strangely enough ended up running the place, after going through the search with them. So yeah, planned a trip with my family and ended up running the place that we were planning a trip to.
So what brought you to New Mexico? Was it our museum here?
Oh, most definitely, yeah. So I lived all over the United States and had been in New Mexico before, but had not really thought about work down here, but I had finished up a lot of the work at that museum up in Kansas. Brought the exhibits up to date, renovated the education programs, had the theater ready to be digitized, et cetera. And Charlie Duke, one of the astronauts from, from Apollo 16, recommended I take a look at a couple of jobs, this being one of them, and did, and liked the fact that the museum needed a lot of work and needed to be updated, and that's kind of a dream for somebody like me. And so came down here, applied and came down here, and am now running the place, and the staff and I are having a great time bringing everything up to date.
Okay, so now part of what your job today here on the show is to convince me to go back to the museum in Alamogordo. It's been at least 11 years since I last visited, and I have to tell you, even 11 years ago, I was impressed by what the museum had to offer. Where's the museum at today?
We've made a ton of improvements here just in the last 3 years. There had been no real exhibit changes, and nothing big from the late 1980s until just recently. There hadn't been a whole lot of capital investment either. So in the last few years, we've put over $3 million of work into the museum.
Okay, $3 million.
Yes, the vast majority of it unseen because a lot of things had to be fixed and repaired, like the roof and HVAC systems and putting in new fiber optic cable and a lot of those repairs that people aren't going to see, but exhibits have been a piece of it as well. And we're going gallery by gallery, working through the museum. We've opened up 2 new galleries in their entirety. We're working on a 3rd one right now that'll be open up this spring. And then we're also putting in, new digital theater system, the first ever of its type. We have, been putting in interactives throughout the museum, new exhibits out in the rocket park, new artifacts coming in. I mean, large collections coming in. So the things have been changing like crazy in the last 3 years. In fact, you really need to come in these days almost once every 6 to 12 months to see things, how they're changing.
Well, let's talk about the history of the museum, because
Yes.
it started out as a historical site.
It started out as a Hall of Fame.
Okay.
You know, that was the genesis of it back in 1976, when kind of a combination of people who'd worked in the space industry and business people and folks out in the town of Alamogordo and in the Tularosa Basin said that they really needed something to honor all of those space pioneers, not just from this area, but internationally. And so they came up with the idea of the International Space Hall of Fame. And that idea caught on. Just, you know, it was like a wildfire almost, really, you know, not just in the area, but throughout the state, up through state government, et cetera. And so the International Space Hall of Fame was born of that. And that's how it started off, was as just, you know, the place to honor those folks. And that's what the first building was. Now, there was supposed to be a whole complex behind the current museum, but budgets being what they are, that never got created. So what happened is that the Hall of Fame got built, the other things didn't, and so the Hall of Fame kind of morphed into a museum during the 1980s. You know, it changed from just being a place where it was just honoring folks in the space industry and just had small exhibits about those people, to a place that had that, but also had exhibits on the width and breadth of space exploration.
Now, I'm going to admit this to you, because I grew up in Houston, Texas. And when you grow up in Houston, you kind of have a chip on your shoulder.
Yep.
That it's NASA Space Center, and it's all about space. It's even called the Space City.
Oh, yeah.
So when I came to New Mexico, I was awakened to the fact that this is the birthplace of space.
Yeah.
Talk to us about the history.
It really is, you know, and I jokingly say a lot of times we have trouble convincing people that New Mexico is part of the United States, let alone that it's been central to not only the United States, but the world's space exploration history. So many of the firsts occurred here, you know. I mean, we have, you know, people talk about things like Stonehenge over in England. You know, we have historic sites that go back, you know, prehistoric, that have to do with, that are very similar to that. So people have been looking at the stars here in this state for forever, you know, whether it's Chaco Canyon or other locations. But you get into the space age that we traditionally think about, you know, the early, you know, late 1800s, early 1900s, and there's three people who are considered the fathers of modern rocketry. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky from Russia, Hermann Oberth from Germany, and then Dr. Robert Goddard from the United States. Well, Goddard started off in Massachusetts, but the vast majority of his research was done here in New Mexico over by Roswell. So that kind of really gets us kicked off in the space age. And then as you head into World War II and really post-World War II, when we start looking at rocketry seriously for space exploration and also for military uses and things like that, you have the development of the locations here, you know, obviously White Sands Missile Range, then White Sands Proving Ground being central to that. But the first rockets launched in the United States that went to space, here in New Mexico. First pictures of the Earth from space, taken in New Mexico. First people ballooning up to the edges of space, done in New Mexico. The first living creatures launched in space, here in New Mexico. First seeds launched in space, here. First primates launched in space, here. First, I mean, the first just continued. The first launch of the Apollo program wasn't at Kennedy Space Center. It was here in New Mexico with the launch of the Little Joe 2 rocket and the testing of the Apollo capsule. Astronauts trained here. The engines that landed us on the moon were tested in New Mexico. You know, nowadays we're still continuing on with what's going on now at the Spaceport America, still at White Sands Missile Range and at White Sands Test Facility, et cetera, et cetera. It just keeps going. So New Mexico has always been central to space exploration's history and current activities.
So it's a hidden treasure
Yes.
to have the Space Museum in Alamogordo. Let's take a virtual tour of the museum itself. You have the Museum of Space History.
Yes.
What's in that?
So, and I'm going to kind of leave out the theater and our other buildings, you know, for the moment, and just talk about the museum building itself, even though we do have exhibits in the other buildings as well. So you kind of have, we call it the diamond in the desert, because it really is. It's a glass building, 4 sides of glass, 80 feet tall, so 8 stories tall, out there up on the mountainside up above Alamogordo. So visually, it's stunning.
It overlooks the entire Tularosa Basin.
It overlooks the entire Tularosa Basin, White Sands National Monument, the mountains on both sides. The views are, you know, are just incomparable, really, from the museum itself. Which is why when people have events at the museum, that's one of the things they take advantage of, is the views, the sweeping views out over the basin. So, But so that's the first thing, and then you start the tour actually not on the ground floor of the museum. You hop in an elevator and you go up to the top floor, and when you hop into the elevator, you have to go through our White Room exhibit. It's like you're getting into the Space Shuttle Endeavour, because once you step into the elevators, the graphics in the inside of the elevator are the inside of the cockpit of Endeavour. So you're getting into a space shuttle to launch, and you go up to the 4th floor, and then you start, we have rampways that take you from floor to floor inside the museum as you work your way back down. But you're going to go in and you're going to kind of get a history, topical history of so many different things, whether up on the upper stories, it's manned space flight, and also key historic artifacts from the history of space exploration, including a Sputnik satellite next to an Explorer satellite with a moon rock down below that. So you're seeing a lot of key items from the collection that starts you off with, after you see the view of the basin, and then you get manned space flight on the next gallery down. And then you move down to the next gallery, and it's all about rockets, missiles, and motors. So you're going to see exhibits on inertial navigation. You're going to see the one of only 2 existing navigation units that were used during the Apollo program. One's at MIT, not open to the public, and then we have the other one on display. So, we've got one of the only 2 on display. Then you go down to our satellite gallery, and you see about the history of satellites and see a number of them hanging up, and you're going to get the story of the GPS program and how important that is to us today. Go down to the next gallery, and it's kind of the New Mexico history with space exploration, where you're going to see things like a Goddard rocket, one of his. You're going to see artifacts from the Trinity site, and what happened there. You're going to see the suits and some of the equipment used when they did the rocket sled testing and the high altitude ballooning here in the state. Ham's capsule, Ham the chimpanzee, that preceded Alan Shepard on his flight, and who is buried at our museum as well. So you get that, and then you go to the next floor. And it's about the inductions into the Hall of Fame, but currently we have a Star Trek exhibit there. It's really about Gene Roddenberry, but you can't tell the story of Gene Roddenberry without having Star Trek as part of it. So we have a full transporter there that people can get into, and artifacts from the TV show. And when I shouldn't say artifacts, I should say props. So you want to see a Tribble? We have a Tribble. You want to see the spears that were used in the Galileo 7 episode? We've got those. And then you get down to our first floor, where we have like a picture opportunity for kids to put on spacesuits.
I was going to ask.
And adults too, and get their picture taken.
The museum itself is very interactive.
Yes. We have a number. That's one of the things that we've been really big as we have made these renovations over the last 3.5 years. We've been adding in interactivity. So whether it's, we have the Rocket Rumbler, where you stand on a pad, and you and a number of other people can stand on that pad, and you get the visuals and the sounds and the feelings of being at a launch site when we're launching a Saturn V or a shuttle or a Redstone rocket or a Soyuz from over on the Russian side. You can land the space shuttle. You can test out different ways to launch a rocket and see if your ideas work. We have the Magic Planet, where you can, with a touchscreen interactive, you can select any planet in the solar system and see it shown in front of you, and about 100 different ways to look at the Earth. So yeah, a number of both electronic and kind of just non-electronic fun things that are physical interactives, I should say, as well. So, and every gallery we open, every improvement that we make, we add in more interactivity.
Talk to me about the International Space Hall of Fame, where all of this began.
So it started off, and there was at that point in time, they were bringing in anywhere from 5 to 10 people a year, and it's designed and was originally created to honor the pioneers and the forerunners of space exploration. And you've got everybody. It's not just astronauts. Because there is an astronaut Hall of Fame. Why repeat that? There are an aviators Hall of Fame and things like that. Ours is the International Space Hall of Fame, so you're going to see Copernicus in there for the work that he did, a Polish, astronomer. You're going to see Galileo in there, so you're going to see a German astronaut like Thomas Reiter in there. You're going to see Konstantin Tsiolkovsky in our Hall of Fame, but you're also going to see Alan Shepard and Neil Armstrong and those sort of folks as well. You'll see technicians, everybody from, say, Günter Wendt, the guy who was the pad leader who ensured the safety of the astronauts before they got into, to fly on their missions. You're going to see flight directors, like Gene Kranz, who, was in charge of that. So you'll see similar folks on the, on the international side. You're going to see astronauts, you're going to see astronomers, you're going to see engineers, et cetera, et cetera. And when it started up, each of these individuals had a pylon, you know, with a big display. When it morphed into a museum, literally it went to just a photo frame with a picture of them and information about what they had done. We're changing that now because that's not enough to honor these folks. We are creating floor-to-ceiling murals in the museum that the first one's being installed starting the beginning of next week for the new way that we're honoring these folks. And they'll have the murals in there with large panels talking about each inductee and what they've done, with a lot more visual information about them and videos and things like that. So, yeah.
Let's go to the big toys.
Yes.
Outside.
Yep, the rocket park.
The rocket park. What can people expect to see out there?
Oh, good grief! So, it's the John Stapp rocket park. Is John Stapp, who rode the rocket sled Sonic Wind 1 up to 632 miles an hour back in the 1950s, is one of the founders of the museum. So we named the rocket park after him. And Sonic Wind 1 is one of the key artifacts that's actually on display there.
How many miles an hour?
632. Can you imagine riding on a sled out in the open going that fast? Yeah.
That was very dangerous because
it was incredibly dangerous.
It was a first, obviously, but
they'd been working their way up in speed. So, you know, I mean, with human and animal testing at that point in time. But John Stapp had ridden the sled and had been working his way up, but this was a major leap in speed. And so there was that unknown of what might or might not happen to him. They were really testing, restraint systems is what they were testing. You know, people think it was all about going fast. No.
No.
Stopping.
It was about stopping.
Yeah. So when he rode on that, he pulled, you know, over 42 Gs, you know, steady Gs at the end of it, you know, so he got up to 632 miles an hour and stopped in less than 2 seconds. So it's like hitting a brick wall at like 100 miles an hour, you know, and the capillaries in his eyes, those little blood vessels, all burst when this occurred. And so his vision went to red and disappeared very quickly. As it occurred, he thought he was going to be blind, you know, for the rest of his life. You know, he thought as he said, that he'd bought the seeing eye dog. And he had a number of other bruises and stuff like that, but no real damage, and he was able to see again very quickly. Within, you know, like 20 minutes, he was able to see again. So, but yeah, I mean, the chutzpah and the guts and the nerve, the bravery to put yourself on that sled and ride up there is just almost unimaginable.
And again, it happened
here in New Mexico, right out in the Tularosa Basin at Holloman Air Force Base, which we look right over. And from our museum, we can point out where the beginning of the track is and where the end of the track is, because they're still operating it today. They're not doing human testing, but they're still operating that track all the time now. So you see that. You see the Little Joe 2 rocket, which was the largest rocket ever launched here in the state of New Mexico. It was the first launch of the Apollo program, and it tested the capsule, the escape system on the capsule. In one of those tests, the rocket actually did explode unintentionally. So it was a true test of that escape system for the rocket, and they proved that that was going to be able to keep the astronauts safe when they launched on top of the Saturn V rockets out of Florida. You're going to see an F-1 engine, one of the engines that was utilized to launch the Saturn V into space. You're going to see a number of drones that were used out at Holloman Air Force Base and White Sands Missile Range, rockets that were used to launch creatures and when I say creatures, I mean fruit flies and mice and things like that up into space for the first time. You'll see the remnants of a V-2 rocket that was launched out at White Sands Missile Range, and those were the first launches into space here in the United States, were those V-2s. So you're going to see those things, just are a few of the items in the rocket park.
What's very important to the New Mexico Museum of Space History is the education part. Let's talk about the Clyde W. Tombaugh Education Center. You also have a program where you actually go out into the community
Yes.
and do that. So let's talk about that.
Yep. So the education center, the Clyde Tombaugh, you know, Tombaugh being the discoverer of Pluto and being did a lot of his work here in New Mexico and with this university. Here, in any case, so we named the building after him, but that building houses not only our education offices, our classrooms, it also houses our theater, which I don't know if you want me to talk about that now or whether later, but the theater it started off as an IMAX theater, a domed IMAX theater.
And I went there.
Opened up back in the 1980s. We have since converted. We have gone digital. It is no longer IMAX because that's a projection system. We have gone with a spit system, which we put in the world's first 4K laser planetarium system in the world. So, and that's utilized to project both our planetarium movies, our planetarium shows, and our giant screen films. You know, what you might call an IMAX. It's almost like Kleenex, you know. People need a tissue, they ask for a Kleenex. You know, IMAX is almost a brand. People think giant screen film, they think IMAX. So, in any case, though, so we have the theater there, we're doing shows, wonderful planetarium movies, you know, about stars. We do live planetarium shows where you get to see the stars in the night sky, and also we can pretty much take you anywhere in the universe with that digital planetarium system that we've just installed. And then we have the giant screen films. Right now we're showing Journey to Space. Soon we're going to be showing a film about the national parks, and then we'll be showing one about aircraft carriers, and we're looking one at China, about China after that. So it's kind of a mix of things there. But the education classrooms and people, our educators, are really the central focus of that building. And so we have school groups that come in all the time for tours. They come in for movies, but they also come in for programs where we do classroom sessions with them where maybe they're learning about gravity, maybe they're learning about rocket launching. I mean, we have a ton of hands-on programs, and they're too numerous for me to list them all out for you. They could see, you know, people could see them on our website. But pretty much, if a teacher wants to teach something in science, especially, you know, without, you know, space exploration, gravity, the physical sciences, we've got a program for it. And we not only teach them there in that building, we take those programs out on the road. And so we're in classrooms in western Texas, here in southern New Mexico, northern New Mexico. We go well north of Santa Fe with our educators with programs into Arizona. We've done that as well, a little bit into southern Colorado. And so we have those same classroom sessions that we can do on the road. We do them, you know, at schools, mostly in the local area. But then also we have a portable planetarium. So it's a digital planetarium just like the one inside the Tombaugh building, but a lot of schools these days can't afford to get to the museum because of the bus rates and things like that. So we have it set up where we can bring the planetarium to them. We have it's an inflatable planetarium. We can fit about 45 kids under the, you know, inside of it. Yep, inside of it. So they're all sitting down, you know, the old Indian style kind of thing. So or however, and they go in. There's a planetarium projector in the middle of it, and we can do any of the same star shows that we do in our facility out there on the road, and that has proved to be wildly popular here recently.
Well, Christopher, I want to thank you very much for joining us here on Fronteras and Changing America. The key is there's so much to talk about that if you get an opportunity to visit Alamogordo, there's lots to do in Alamogordo. Definitely go check out the New Mexico Museum of Space History. Thank you for joining us on Fronteras and Changing America.